Well, today marks the beginning of Holy Week. And, as we read through the stories of Holy Week, we're actually like following stories of Jesus that the church has followed for thousands of years. We reenact them together to not just get the stories in our heads, but to live them inside of our lives, to embody them as a people, So this week, what I don't want you to miss is the theatrics of it all. That it's a part of our formation to walk through these steps. And today is Palm Sunday, and Palm Sunday kicks it off with a lot of theatrics. Jesus is coming into Jerusalem. He's entering the city where he will eventually be killed. And he comes in on this day, and as he comes into the city, people are gathering around. They're laying down palm branches in front of him. They're taking off their cloaks, laying them in front, screaming, "Hosanna in the highest." This is the one who has come to save us. This would not have been an abnormal thing, actually, in Jerusalem. That it was very common for a king to come into the city and for people to gather around and cry out and give glory to that king. Except typically a king would come in not on a colt, not on a donkey, but on a high horse. It would also be very common for a military leader to come back from battle, to come in on a high horse and have everything that he had taken with him, the pillages of war gathering behind him, all of these weak people that are brought back to serve as slaves where he's from. And people would gather around and give glory to this militant leader. And so Jesus is engaging in the moment with some theatrics. He's making a bit of a mockery of Rome. He's coming in not on a high horse, but on a donkey. Good news, not to the powerful, but to the weak. That Jesus comes in on this day, making a mockery of the whole thing. As many of you know, if you've been around, I grew up playing hockey. I'm Canadian. And when I was 15, I got invited to play in this prospects game. So in Canada at 15, that's the year you're really trying to get scouts at the next level to notice you, to maybe get drafted onto a team or get signed to a new club. And when I was 15, I got invited to play in this game where all of the best players from my half of the province played against all the best players from the other half of the province. A province is like a state, but better. And we play in this game, and it was a really big deal. I mean, I was really nervous, and I wanted to put my best foot forward, and I wanted to, skate as fast as I could, and right from the beginning. And so the game starts, and they're announcing players. So we're all in the tunnel, and they're calling out our name and our number, and everything's on full display. They really did it up for us. It was really kind of them. And I come out on the ice, and I'm skating as fast as I can and warm up around and around and around. And I'm telling you the truth. I was moving so well. People in the stands were pointing at me. I was sticking out already in warm up. And then my teammates were all yelling things at me as well. Like they were noticing too. I didn't know what they were saying. I grew up in New Brunswick, which is like 50% French. So they were all speaking French. I had no idea what they were saying, right? I'm skating around. And as I'm skating around, I look back. And at some point in the dressing room, I had sat on a piece of tape in like a garbage bag. And it was flying behind me like this, right? This moment with all of this glory, I was quickly very much humbled, very much humbled. Holy Week sits in this tension of glory and humility. Holy Week invites us into this tension between glory and humility. And is always going to keep asking us, whose glory? And how might God be inviting me to be humbled? Lots of times on Palm Sunday, we celebrate just that event, but it's the kickoff to a really important week. So on Thursday, at the end of this time, and again, following the story, Jesus which we'll talk about today, will spend some time in Jerusalem. But then at the kind of end of this section, there's a story about Jesus' last moments with his disciples around a table. We celebrate that on what's called Maundy Thursday. And so for us as a community, we want to spend Maundy, Thursday around tables. We want to enter the theatrics of it and help that story become a part of our lives. So 5 different times this Thursday, you could join with a group of us at any of these locations. I'm going to try to be at all of them, so I will be very full by the end of the day. Maybe you'll try to be at all of them. Maybe you want to grab 2 of them or 1 of them as it fits in your schedule. But I would encourage you to take a moment on Maundy, Thursday, sit around a table with a few of us and relive this moment. The next day on the schedule is Good Friday. This is the day in the story as well. Jesus gets up from the table that night and is when he faces the betrayal of Judas and begins to move towards the cross and his suffering. And so on Good Friday, we actually walk through suffering. We walk through death. We even consider some of the things in our lives that might need to die. And so on Good Friday, we'll gather here at 6 p.m. and we'll have a service oriented around where might we be seeking resurrection, which is a nice way of saying what might need to go, what might need to die in my life, so I too might follow Jesus into resurrection. Now on Saturday, we won't gather together as a community, but historically, this would be called Silent Saturday. So the goal is that you would take Saturday and kind of sit in it. It's actually meant to memorialize the days that his disciples thought it was over, that Jesus was just dead, and they'd gone back to their regular lives. But we know that's not the end of the story, don't we? So on Saturday is a day set aside for contemplation, to spend maybe some extra moments of silence considering where we've been with Jesus up to this point. And then Sunday morning, we'll gather here for both of our regular services, and we will celebrate what is central to our life together, resurrection. You know, every Sunday is meant to celebrate resurrection in some way. It's what we gather around every Sunday, but on this Sunday, on Easter Sunday, is when we pull out all the stops. It's a great day to be here. It's a phenomenal day to bring a friend with you, a neighbor, a family member, a coworker. It's really simple. It's like, this is an important part of my life. I would love to invite you to experience it with me. And so there's cards on your seats. If that helps you invite a friend or a stranger, you could bring those with you this week. If you think you're like really eager and 2 cards is not enough, there's another 600 floating around the lobby. So take as many as you want and invite as many people as you want. But we want that day to celebrate everything that our world and life is about. And for us, that's the resurrection of Jesus. But today is not Good Friday, it's not Maundy, Thursday, it's not Easter Sunday, it's Palm Sunday. And so as we heard the story earlier from some of our kids, as we're carrying these palm branches, I'd encourage you to take those home with you and put them somewhere in your house and set it somewhere to be a reminder of the peace of God that you invite into your home. I often like to take my palm branch every year and put it behind a family picture, reminding me and our family that we are a people of peace, and this is how we carry ourselves in the world. Maybe you want to put that in an important room in your home where people gather so you'll see it often and be reminded that we are a people of peace, and this is what we carry into the world. But as we see on Palm Sunday, is the tension around Jesus' message of peace is continuing to grow. In the book of Mark, where we've been spending this Lenten season, in his account, Jesus comes in on this Palm Sunday, and there's all the pomp and circumstance. And then he goes to the temple, and he sees some things happening he's not super thrilled with, and decides, I'm tired. I'm going to go home and come back and deal with this tomorrow. And so actually, that's where I want to pick up today, is on the next day. Starting in Mark 11, we'll pick up this story. The next day, after leaving Bethany was just outside of Jerusalem. It's where Jesus and his disciples were staying during this week of Passover. Jesus was hungry. From far away, he noticed a fig tree in leaf. So he went to see if he could find anything on it. When he came to it, he found nothing except leaves, since it wasn't the season for figs. So Jesus was hoping that maybe just one fig popped through pre-season. So he said to it, "No one will ever again eat your fruit." His disciples heard this. This is a bit of an odd part of the text, a bit of a weird story. Jesus seems a little harsh here. I mean, the fig tree is not even in season. Obviously, there would not be figs to eat. So Jesus cursing this tree seems a little bit out of character, unlike Jesus. So what I'd like for you to do with this story, I want you to take it, like put it in your pocket somewhere in the back of your mind. In about 8 minutes, we're going to understand this moment, okay? He carries on with his disciples. They came into Jerusalem, and after entering the temple, he threw out those who were selling and buying there. He pushed over tables used for currency exchange and the chairs of those who sold doves. He didn't allow anyone to carry anything through the temple. For about a decade of my life, I played in a band, and there was one night, it would have been about almost 15, 16 years ago, we were playing in this church. And I don't know how much you know about bands, but bands are just an affront for t-shirt companies, okay? And so we would get into our venue always. This time it was a church, and we set up our table out in the lobby area and started setting up t-shirts. And an elder in the church came to us and said, "Oh, you can't do that here." We're like, "Why not?" "Well, Jesus, you remember the story of when he flipped tables in the temple? You're not supposed to sell things in church." Now, I wasn't about to exegete the text with this elder that day. And I was like, "Okay, so, she said, well, you can go out in the parking lot. That's fine." So lobby not okay, parking lot is okay? And we did great on t-shirts that night. So, I guess people are really up for being a part of a resistance, and so we sold t-shirts, all that. But what's actually going on in this text is not about whether or not you sell things in a church building. Jesus is not concerned with this. What was happening on this day in the temple, or this week in the temple, it's Passover. Passover was a really important Jewish holiday, a Jewish celebration. And so Jews from all over the region would travel into Jerusalem to participate in Passover. And part of Passover was to bring sacrifices to the temple. But if you were traveling from far away, bringing your doves with you was a little bit cumbersome. And so people would show up. And this was an opportunity for some of the business folk around to make some money. And so they were setting up places for people to exchange their currency and be able to buy doves to sacrifice in the temple. The problem is they were cheating people out on the exchange, and they were upselling the cost of doves. They were taking this moment to keep people away from experience the grace of God rather than being a pathway to the grace of God. They weren't doing this to help people worship God. They were doing this to actually keep people away from worshiping God. Those people aren't from here. They shouldn't be able to just come in here. And so we are going to make some money off them and keep those certain kinds of people away unless they can pay. So Jesus is extremely frustrated about this. And this is what he says. He taught them after flipping tables. He taught them, "Hasn't it been written, my house will be called a house of prayer for all nations, but you've turned it into a hideout for crooks." Hasn't it been written, Jesus says, that my house has been called a house of prayer for all nations, but you've turned it into a hideout for crooks. Now, anytime you're reading the scriptures, and especially Jesus, when it says, "for it is written," it's a good idea to figure out what he's talking about. Jesus here is actually quoting from the book of Isaiah. Jesus is quoting a passage of scripture that would have been familiar to most Jews, a passage of scripture they would have grown up on. It would have been a passage of scripture to help them understand their identity in the world. This is from Isaiah chapter 56. "Don't let the immigrant who has joined with the Lord say, 'The Lord will exclude me from the people.'" Interesting. "Don't let the eunuch say, 'I am just a dry tree.'" Remember the fig tree? The Lord says, to the eunuchs who keep my Sabbath, choose what I desire, and remain loyal to my covenant, in my temple courts, I will give them a monument and a name that is better than sons and daughters. I will give them an enduring name that won't be removed. This is a powerful call on who God's people are meant to be. Immigrants, I think some of that would make sense why God would need to address this. I think it's pretty natural for people to begin thinking like God gave this to us. Maybe those people out there shouldn't benefit from what God gave to us. That would have been a very normal nationalist way to think. But for God's people, God's saying this isn't so. This is not how we are going to be. This is not how we're going to mark our identity. But this book of Isaiah also mentions eunuchs. So eunuchs were usually men, most commonly men who were called to serve and work for a king. And their job was to take care of the king's harem, his prostitutes, the women who worked in the temple to go out and work at the king's orders. And he wanted a man to take care of this part of the king's business that was, how do you say this? Going to be a seller, but not a user. And so these men were brutalized. Their genitals were taken from them to make sure that these eunuchs would not be compromised. Eunuchs also could refer to men who were maybe more effeminate, that weren't considered fully men, Eunuchs sometimes were men who were born without fully grown genitals. They would be considered eunuchs, not quite men. And these men would be cast away, that as they got older, they would be alone and not allowed to participate fully in worship. But Isaiah, in the book of Isaiah, says this: I will give them a monument, a name that is better than sons and daughters. These men who were no longer considered sons could not be. Isaiah is saying, not in this house, not in this family. That's not how it's going to work in this community. They're going to have a monument, a name that is better than sons and daughters. I think this is incredibly good news. If you feel like in any way you don't fit in, and for some reason you don't fit in a particular way, that it's causing you to think that God loves you less or cares for you less, or maybe there's actual humans in your life because of the way that you don't fit in are trying to keep you from the grace of God, either through messaging or literal gatekeeping. From ancient Hebrew texts describes a community that does not behave that way, the community of God. And so Isaiah goes on in Isaiah 56. It says, the immigrants who have joined me, serving me and loving my name, becoming my servants, everyone who keeps the Sabbath without making it impure, and those who hold fast to my covenant, I will bring them to my holy mountain. I will bring them joy in my house of prayer. I will accept their entirely burnt offerings and sacrifices on my altar. And this is where this quote comes from. My house will be known as a house of prayer for who? For who? All peoples. My house will be known as a house of prayer, not just for those people or those people or those people, but if people want to come and experience the grace of God that has been bestowed upon you, you should not be gatekeepers of that grace. You should not be going great lengths to keep people away from that grace. But my people, God's people, we are invited to be a pathway to that grace. Inviting all people, says the Lord God, who gathers Israel's outcasts, all the people that have been pushed away for one reason or another. God is calling them and gathering them, and I will gather still others who have already gathered. Jesus is making a big statement here. I mean, this is like the literary version of a literary throwdown, right? He goes on in Mark. It says, the chief of priests and the legal experts heard this and tried to find a way to destroy him. They regarded him as dangerous because the whole crowd was enthralled with his teachings. Of course they were. I mean, here's crowds of people who have been desperately trying to experience the grace of God and have been caught in a system of power where Rome is trying to keep them away from it, where the Sadducees are trying to keep them away from it, the Pharisees are trying to keep them away from it, the legal experts are trying to keep them away from it. Everyone's trying to commodify the grace of God. And let me tell you, friends, the grace of God does not have a cost. The grace of God is free. It's for anyone who wants to come towards the grace of God. And so the people who were commodifying this, who had the power to keep people away, they find Jesus to be dangerous because the community, the people that have been on the underside of that system of oppression are enthralled with his teachings. And of course they are. This is something this guy is saying, we can just come, we can just participate. What an amazing invitation. When it was evening, Jesus and his disciples went outside the city and went back to Bethany. And early in the morning, as Jesus and his disciples were walking along, they saw the fig tree. Remember that? Withered up from root. Peter remembered and said to Jesus, Rabbi, look how the fig tree you cursed has dried up. The disciples are like seeing this fig tree and they're going back to this teaching as they're walking into the city. Right before, remember the fig tree story, right before Jesus makes this scene in the temple. Now they're walking the next day and they see this fig tree dried up. And they remember the story of this withered tree in the book of Isaiah. They're making all these connections. And they're wondering, Jesus, who's the fig tree here? Is it us? Are we the fig tree? Jesus, is this a message for us as disciples? And this is what Jesus says. He responds to them. Have faith in God, I say. I assure you that whoever says to this mountain, be lifted up and thrown into the sea, and doesn't waver, but believes what is said will really happen, it will happen. Therefore, I say to you, whatever you pray and ask for, believe that you will receive it, and it will be so for you. What's he talking about? Grace. Grace. All of the other noise in your world is telling you all of the reasons you can't experience the grace of God. All of these other voices and powers and principalities are telling you all the reasons, all the hoops you got to jump through to get to the grace of God. And Jesus says to those that are being kept away for whatever reason, he says, whatever you pray and ask for, believe it and you'll receive it. You want to experience the grace of God. Ask for it. Trust me. Believe it. Jesus is positioning himself as the way to the grace of God. He's wondering with his disciples, do you buy it? Do you buy it? Are you going to follow me? Because there's all these other options. There's all these other opinions. There's all of these other thoughts. And Jesus is saying, I am a way, a different way, a unique way to grace in God. Jesus spends then the next 2 days, how do you say it? Like putting his money where his mouth is. He actually spends 2 days in the city debating people. I mean, he's really caused a stir. And so Pharisees and Sadducees and religious experts, they want to debate with him and come back and forth with him. And Jesus is willing to engage, always telling these parables and these stories. They want to debate with him about money. Well, what about the money, Jesus? Like, how do we keep this up? What do we do with our money? And Jesus debates with them and then tells, he's always pointing to the humble and the meek. He tells this story of, like, look at this woman who has just 2 coins. Like, you want to push back on me and debate with me, and I'll have this conversation, but let me make an example of this humble servant, this humble woman here who has so little and gives so much. They want to debate with him about the glories of the temple. They're like, but Jesus, what about the temple? Like, look what we built. Look how great this is. Look how this temple, look how everything we've done here glorifies you. And Jesus starts talking really cryptically about actually the temple's all going to go away. It's all going to go away. And it's actually in this moment that he reminds them of the fig tree. Who's the fig tree? And then all of these debates end with a moment where Jesus is at this man's house named Simon. And it says that Simon has a skin disease. And based on this story, it sounds like Simon was pretty well-to-do, that he was of a higher class, but he had a skin disease. And he invites Jesus to come to his house because Jesus was getting a reputation that he would eat with people with skin diseases, something most rabbis would not do. And so he's gathering at this house, and Simon was well-to-do enough that he had people preparing the food and serving the food, that there was people who didn't just live in the house or were guests of the house. There were people who worked at his house. They're of lower class in the house. And as they're eating and sharing, and everyone's so honored that Jesus is in their midst, this woman comes out of the kitchen and she's weeping. And she falls at the feet of Jesus. And she has in her hands a bottle of perfume. It's likely the most expensive thing she owns. And she falls to the feet of Jesus and she's weeping on his feet and dumping perfume on his feet and taking her hair and drying it off with her hair. I mean, can you see this moment as she's holding her? I mean, this is her glory. I mean, this is everything her life has amounted to. And she's pouring it at the feet of Jesus in this incredible humility, crying out, begging for the grace of God to be on her life. And as we peer into this moment, we recognize that even followers of Jesus at this time want to keep solving the same problem with the same thing. Have you heard the saying, when the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail? They're trying to take Jesus in this moment and make a religion out of him. I mean, they've been listening for 3 years as Jesus has been talking a lot about taking care of the poor. And so someone around the table thinks, oh, I'm going to show Jesus that I've been paying attention. And says, hey, we should probably look down upon this woman because this is not the right way to do this. She could have sold that perfume and given the money to the poor. And here's how Jesus responds. He says, leave her alone. Leave her alone. Why do you make trouble for her? She has done good things for me. You always have the poor with you, and whenever you want, you can do something good for them. He's calling out their religion, isn't he? You want to make a point about this right now. But you just walked past a ton of poor people on the way to this gathering, didn't you? The poor are always with you, and you can help them whenever you want. But you won't always have me, Jesus says. She's done what she could. She has anointed my body ahead of time for burial. And I tell you the truth, that wherever in the whole world good news is announced, what she's done will also be told in memory of her. Here's this invitation of Holy Week. It's this invitation of glory and humility. It's bringing our glory, everything that maybe we amount to, fully ourselves, and being able to come to Jesus in a posture of humility and choose to look to him. Jesus, all of this noise is going on around me. I can't sort it all out. I can't figure all this out. My life is complicated. But I want to come to you fully as I am and sit at your feet with my glory. I mean, the good and the bad part, my whole self, Jesus, and fix my eyes on you. There's a song that is about, it's about 100 years old. Some of you in the room might know it. It's an old song called Turn Your Eyes Upon Jesus. I didn't grow up in a church that sang these kinds of songs, so they're somewhat fresh to me. But turn your eyes upon Jesus well, it sounds like it could be about this passage. It's actually not. It's about this woman named Lilith Trotter. Lilith Trotter was born, she lived in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Lilith Trotter was an artist in London during this time, in a time when women were not able to build a career around art. This was a job only for men. But Lilith Trotter was good. I mean, she was real good. That she gained the attention of some really famous male artists in London. And they started to speak up saying, this woman is really good. Like, she might be the first woman to have a career as a painter in London. But Lilith Trotter was more dynamic than just her paintings. Lilith Trotter was known that in the evening she would sneak out at night and go care for some of the prostitutes in London. And just as she would do this at night and paint by day, and as her career was growing and growing, she felt this call to the outcasts of our society on a global level. And so she moved to Africa and wanted to spend time with the impoverished people of Africa. Actually, if you look up her paintings now, she continued to paint all through this journey, and her paintings are amazing. She had this way of seeing things that nobody else could see and revealing them in her paintings. Lilith Trotter, near the end of her life, wrote a poem about how she focused, how she gave up her glory, this potential of being the first woman to have a career as an artist in London, to go and serve people in Africa. And at the end of her life, this is some excerpts from this poem that she wrote called Focused. She said, "Never has it been so easy to live in half a dozen good, harmless worlds at once." This is the early 1900s. Art, music, social, science, games, motoring, the following of some profession, and so on. And between them, we run the risk of drifting about the good and hiding the best. She goes on in her poem to say it's easy to find out whether our lives are focused, and if so, where the focus lies. Where do our thoughts settle when our consciousness comes back in the morning? Where do they swing back when the pressure is off during the day? Does this test not give the clue? Then dare to have it out with God, she says. And after all, that is the shortest way. Dare to lay bare your whole life being before him and ask him to show you whether or not all is focused on Christ and his glory. Dare to face the fact that unfocused good, as useful as it may seem, will prove to have failed at its purpose. Will it not make life narrow, this focusing? In a sense, it will, she goes on, just as the mountain path grows narrower, for it matters more and more the higher we go, where we set our feet. But there is always, as it narrows, a wider and wider outlook and purer and clearer air. Narrow as Christ's life was narrow, this is our aim. Narrow as regards to self-seeking, but broad as the love of God to all around. Is there anything to fear in that, she says. So how do we bring things to a focus in the world of optics? Not by looking at the things to be dropped, but by looking at the one point that is to be brought out. She closes her poem saying, "Turn full your soul's vision to Jesus and look at him. And a strange dimness will come over all that is apart from him. And the divine, a trait is a French word for character or attribute. And the divine, a trait by which God's saints are made, even in this 20th century, will lay hold for you. For he is worthy to have all there is to be had in the heart that he has died to win." Isn't that beautiful? This call to focus our attention solely on Jesus, fully ourselves, and see where that might take us. I wanted to finish my sermon today, if it's okay, singing this song that was written as a response to this poem, to turn our eyes on Jesus. And maybe as we sing, you might just reflect on all of the noise that might be in your life today. And maybe make a decision for a week, just like a week. So this week, I want to focus my attention on Jesus. That for thousands of years, this Holy Week has helped us do this. Going all the way back to centuries of past, people have struggled with the noise of life. We might think we're really unique in this time, but turns out we're not. I need Holy Week. I hope you might see that you do too. And you join us this week in focusing our attention on Jesus. Turn your eyes upon Jesus. Look full in his wonderful face, and the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace. Turn your eyes upon Jesus. Look full in his wonderful face, and the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace. Let's sing this just one more time, and just feel free to do whatever you need to do to focus. Close your eyes, stare at the floor, stand, sit, open your hands, close your hands. I hope this moment won't pass you by. Turn your eyes upon Jesus. Look full in his wonderful face, and the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace. In the light of his glory and grace. God, I thank you for this invitation that you're always giving us to come and experience the grace of God. And so, Lord, I pray during this Holy Week that you would just show us, help us. This is so hard to help us focus our attention on you amidst all the distractions, all of the challenges we face. Lord, I pray you would lead us in your way this week.